The Galactic Council had always dismissed Earth as a harmless backwater world, a planet filled with primitive creatures who fought among themselves, squandered their resources, and barely managed space travel beyond their own moon. For centuries, the ruling species of the galaxy, the Cathari, the Draal, the Vortian, viewed Earth as nothing more than a curiosity, an unimportant world in the vast sea of stars. The Cathari, a race of towering, crystalline beings, had once surveyed Earth millennia ago and deemed it biologically unremarkable. The Draal, cybernetic warlords who had conquered a dozen star systems, saw Earth as a primitive rock unworthy of conquest. The Vortian, an ancient species with near-immortal lifespans, found humans too reckless, too emotional, too unpredictable to be of any significance. And so, Earth was left alone. But all of that changed the day the Rulzaran Empire made the mistake of invading. The Rulzarans were a brutal, war-hardened species, their empire stretching across hundreds of worlds. They were conquerors, believing that only the strongest had the right to exist. They had crushed the Trelkan uprising in a matter of days, reduced the proud Balinari race to servitude, and even driven the fierce Gorathians into extinction. When their warships entered the Sol system, they expected the same easy victory. They were wrong. The first strike came swiftly. Orbital bombardments turned entire cities into rubble, leaving millions dead within hours. The Galactic Council watched from a distance, assuming Earth would fall like so many others before it. They expected humanity to surrender. Instead, humanity fought back. Within hours of the invasion, human forces responded with a ferocity that shocked the galaxy. They weren't just defending their world, they were attacking. Every inch of ground was contested with sheer determination, every street turned into a battleground. The Rulzarans expected submission. What they got was defiance. The Council had seen planetary resistance before, but this was different. Human pilots, flying machines far inferior to Rulzaran warships, began ramming into enemy vessels in suicidal attacks. Infantry fought in brutal, close-quarters combat, using anything they could, guns, knives, bare hands, to take down their enemies. And when nuclear warheads were launched against the invaders, it sent a message that chilled even the most hardened council members. Humans did not fear destruction. For the first time in their history, the Rulzarans hesitated. Their ships, their armies, their overwhelming technological superiority, it didn't matter. The humans didn't fight for conquest or survival alone. They fought with something the galaxy had never understood before: sheer, unbreakable will. Then, the humans retaliated. Their scientists, engineers, and strategists, once mocked as primitive, began adapting alien technology at an alarming rate. They didn't just fight back. They learned, they improved, and they turned the enemy's weapons against them. Within weeks, human strike teams infiltrated Rulzaran command ships. Within months, entire Rulzaran fleets were being ambushed and destroyed. The Galactic Council watched in horror as the impossible happened. Earth wasn't falling. The Rulzaran Empire was. One by one, their colonies burned. Their warships were hunted down and obliterated, and soon the unthinkable occurred. The Rulzaran homeworld, the heart of their mighty empire, was left defenseless, and the humans, in their relentless pursuit of vengeance, unleashed hell upon it. The war was over. The Rulzarans were no more. And now the galaxy looked at Earth with new eyes. The Council once thought Earth was harmless. Now they understood the truth. Earth wasn't just another planet. It was a warning. In the aftermath of the war, the galaxy fell into uneasy silence. The once mighty Rulzaran Empire had been erased from existence, their fleets shattered, their homeworld reduced to an uninhabitable wasteland. No one had ever seen a species rise so quickly, adapt so ruthlessly, and retaliate with such relentless fury. The Galactic Council held an emergency summit, their halls filled with hushed whispers and nervous glances. The Cathari, the Vortian, the Draal, and the dozen other dominant species of the galaxy now faced a terrifying truth. Humanity was no longer an overlooked anomaly. They were now the single most unpredictable force in the universe. "They are not like any species we have encountered," said High Chancellor Voshtal of the Vortian. "They do not break. They do not surrender. And worse—" He paused, his glowing green eyes narrowing. "They learn." The Cathari delegate, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy, nodded. "The humans took the invaders' technology and improved it. That is what frightens me the most. They did not simply resist the Rulzarans, they consumed them." The Draal warlord, a cybernetic nightmare of steel and flesh, growled, "We should have eradicated them when we had the chance." The chamber fell silent at his words. That was the unspoken thought lingering in every mind. Earth had gone from an afterthought to a threat overnight. And yet, despite the fear, no one dared make the first move. The humans had not expanded their conquest. They had not demanded tribute or subjugated the rest of the galaxy. They had taken their vengeance, and then they had stopped. That, more than anything, unsettled the Council. Humans weren't driven by the same hunger for power that the Draal thrived on, nor the calculated territorial expansion of the Vortian. No, humanity had proven they were something far worse. They were unpredictable. And then the message arrived. A single transmission, sent from the newly rebuilt capital of Earth. It was short, simple, and more terrifying than a declaration of war. "We remember." With those two words, the galaxy understood what they had unleashed. Earth had been attacked, humanity had been underestimated, and now every species knew if another empire ever made the mistake of threatening them again, there would be no mercy. The galaxy would never forget the day it witnessed Earth's power, because humanity never would. The galaxy tried to move on. Trade routes reopened, alliances were reforged, and empires resumed their quiet struggles for influence. But beneath the surface, an unshakable fear lingered. Humanity had changed everything. The Vortian, masters of diplomacy, attempted to reach out. Their envoys arrived on Earth, hoping to mend relations, to study the creatures they had once dismissed as insignificant. What they found was a world that had transformed itself in record time. Human cities, once devastated by war, had been rebuilt with terrifying efficiency. Defense systems lined the skies, energy shields and orbital platforms standing guard over every major population center. Humanity wasn't celebrating victory. It was preparing for the next war. "We do not seek conflict," the Vortian ambassador told the leaders of Earth. The response was cold. "Neither did we." The Cathari tried a different approach. They offered humanity a seat at the Galactic Council, an unprecedented gesture for a species so young. But when the first human delegation arrived at the Council's grand chamber, they did not come with gratitude. They came with demands. "The Council watched as Earth burned," spoke Ambassador Adrian Wells, his voice echoing through the vast hall. "You dismissed our suffering as insignificant. You assumed we would crumble. And now you offer us a seat, not out of goodwill, but out of fear." The assembled species shifted uncomfortably. The humans were right. "We accept," Wells continued, his piercing gaze scanning the room. "But understand this. Humanity is not here to bow. We are here to ensure that what happened to Earth never happens again. Not to us, not to anyone." It wasn't a speech. It was a warning. From that day forward, Earth's presence reshaped the balance of power. Humanity refused to be a passive member of the galaxy. Where the Council hesitated, humans acted. When pirate fleets raided defenseless colonies, it was human warships that responded first. When corrupt empires sought to exploit weaker species, human soldiers arrived to defend them. Some called them protectors, others called them meddlers. But no one dared to call them weak. And then the whispers began. Deep in the outer systems, beyond the reach of the Council, something was stirring. Ships were vanishing. Entire colonies were going dark. At first, the Council dismissed the rumors as mere pirate activity. But the humans knew better. They had seen war, they had seen conquest, and they recognized the signs. Something was coming, and this time, humanity would not wait for the first strike. They would be ready. The signs were subtle at first. Freighters failing to check in, distress signals abruptly cut off, frontier colonies going silent one by one. The Galactic Council dismissed it as typical fringe sector instability, blaming pirates, navigational errors, or local conflicts. But humanity had learned a hard lesson from the Rule-Zarin War. The first warning signs of a disaster were always ignored until it was too late. And so, while the rest of the galaxy remained complacent, Earth prepared. The newly formed Terran Defense Initiative, TDI, launched a series of scouting missions into the uncharted regions beyond Council space. These were not official, nor were they sanctioned. Humanity had learned that when danger lurked in the void, the Council preferred to look the other way. But Earth could not afford such ignorance. Captain Jackson Reed of the UNSV Argus, a state-of-the-art reconnaissance vessel, led the first mission into the dead expanse, a vast region of space where ships had been disappearing. The Argus had the best stealth technology humanity had reverse-engineered from its conquered enemies. It could slip between star systems unnoticed, its sensors piercing the darkness in search of the unknown. It took only 3 days before they found it. A derelict Vortian colony ship floated aimlessly near the edge of a dying star system. It was massive, capable of carrying 500,000 Vortian citizens. There was no distress beacon, no signs of battle damage. It was simply abandoned. Reed ordered his team to board. The moment they stepped inside, the silence was suffocating. The ship was intact, its systems still humming with faint energy. Half-eaten meals sat untouched in the mess halls. Doors remained open as if their occupants had simply walked away mid-step. But there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. It was as if every living thing had simply vanished. The deeper they went, the worse it got. Crew quarters were eerily pristine, their owners' belongings still in place, beds left unmade, clothes draped over chairs. The bridge crew's terminals were still active, displaying star charts and half-written logs that ended abruptly. The security systems recorded nothing unusual, and yet the ship was empty. Then they found the writing, carved deep into the walls, into the floor, into the very metal of the ship. It sees, it waits, it knows. A shiver ran down Reed's spine. His comms officer, Lieutenant Mara Santos, whispered, "Sir, I think we need to leave." Then the lights flickered, and the whispering began. It wasn't over the comms. It wasn't coming from their translators. It was inside their helmets, inside their minds, a chorus of voices speaking in a language no one could understand, layered upon itself in an eerie, overlapping harmony. The words were wrong, impossible sounds that twisted inside the brain like living things. "Back to the shuttle, now." Reed's voice was calm, but his heart was hammering. The team moved quickly, but the whispering grew louder. The ship, once silent, now creaked and groaned, as if awakening from a deep slumber. Shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching and shifting where there should have been no movement. Then Santos screamed. She staggered, clutching her helmet, eyes wide in terror. "It's inside! It's watching!" Reed grabbed her by the arm, pulling her toward the exit. The whispering became a roar, an overwhelming storm of incomprehensible words that clawed at their thoughts. The walls of the ship seemed to pulse, the metal flexing as if something massive was shifting beneath its surface. They barely made it to the shuttle. As soon as they were aboard, Reed barked, "Get us out of here!" The pilot, hands shaking, launched the shuttle at full burn. As they cleared the docking bay, the Argus fired its main guns, sending searing energy beams into the derelict ship. It shuddered, the metal screaming as it twisted inward, folding into itself as if being devoured by an invisible force. Then it was gone. Not destroyed, not exploded. Just gone. The Argus wasted no time escaping the system. Reed's report to High Command was marked urgent, existential threat potential. Within hours, Earth's leadership convened an emergency meeting. The galaxy believed it was at peace. Humanity knew better. Something was in the void. Something ancient, something patient. And now it knew humanity had seen it. The briefing room aboard the UNSV Titan was silent. It was the kind of silence that came when people were faced with something too big, too terrifying to fully comprehend. Captain Jackson Reed sat at the head of the table, his hands clenched as he replayed the footage from the Argus's mission. The council representatives sat in stunned horror, their faces pale, their bodies tense. The Vortian ambassador, High Chancellor Voshtal, had not spoken since the recording began. His species had ruled for millennia, witnessing wars, disasters, even planetary extinctions, but nothing like this. The Vortian colony ship had been one of their largest and most advanced. It should have been impossible for it to simply disappear. And yet, it had. "This cannot be real," the Cathari delegate muttered, his crystalline body dimming in distress. "There is no force in this galaxy capable of that." Reed leaned forward. His voice was steady, controlled. "Then explain what happened, because I saw it with my own eyes. My crew felt it." The Vortian finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "The writing, on the walls." He exhaled sharply. "We have seen it before." The room froze. "What?" Reed's eyes narrowed. Voshtal hesitated, then continued. "It is ancient, older than our records, older than even the Drawl archives. There are legends of entire civilizations vanishing without a trace, but we always believed they were myths." He paused. "We call it the unseen." A chill settled over the room. The Drawl representative scoffed, but there was a nervous twitch in his mechanical eye. "Superstitious nonsense. Some kind of anomaly, a spatial collapse, an unknown weapon?" "Do we have a weapon that can do this?" Reed interrupted, locking eyes with the Drawl warlord. The alien's response was silence. Reed pressed on. "This is not a myth. We found that colony ship. It wasn't destroyed, it was empty. And then, it wasn't there anymore." He took a slow breath. "If your legends are true, then we need to know everything." Voshtal hesitated again, then finally he spoke. "Long before our time, there were others," he said. "Empires that spanned the stars, species that ruled unchallenged. They believed themselves invincible." His eyes darkened. "Then, one by one they vanished. No war, no destruction, just gone." Reed frowned. "And no one thought to warn the rest of the galaxy?" "They did." Voshtal's voice was grim. "They left messages, the same words your people found on that ship. It sees, it waits, it knows." Silence. It was the Cathari who finally broke it. "We have been arrogant," he murmured. "For so long we have believed ourselves the masters of the stars. But something else has been watching. Waiting." Reed clenched his jaw. He had seen wars. He had seen planets burn, seen entire species wiped from existence. But this was something else, something worse. It wasn't an enemy they could fight. It was something beyond war, beyond weapons. A predator. The Galactic Council scrambled. They dispatched ships, probed the dark corners of space, sent their best scientists to analyze the anomaly. But the disappearances continued. Ships, stations, entire planets, gone without a trace. And then the message came. It wasn't transmitted through radio waves. It wasn't intercepted by any known system. It appeared all at once in every database, every console, every starship across the galaxy. A single sentence, burned into every screen, every language, in letters that seemed to twist and shift like something alive. You have been seen. Humanity had spent so long proving itself to the galaxy, showing that it was not weak, not to be underestimated. Now, they had the galaxy's attention. But something else had noticed them, too. And it was coming. Panic spread like wildfire. The message had appeared everywhere at once. Every species, every colony, every station, every single being in the galaxy had seen those words. You have been seen. There was no known technology that could have accomplished this. Not even the most advanced civilizations had the ability to bypass encrypted networks on a galactic scale. The message wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand. It was something far worse. It was a statement of fact. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council declared a state of universal emergency. Armadas were mobilized, colonies fortified, and border systems evacuated. But where would they run? What were they even preparing to fight? No one knew, except humanity. The moment the message appeared, Earth's response was immediate. The Terran Defense Initiative initiated Protocol Black, a plan that had been theorized, but never used until now. Every major city was placed under martial law. Every military asset was deployed. Every scientist, engineer, and strategist was called upon to prepare for what was coming. Humanity had learned far too late that they had not been alone in the dark. They had never been alone. And then the first world vanished. It was a Drawl colony, home to over 7 billion souls. There was no warning, no distress calls, no signs of an attack. One moment it was there. The next, its star system was empty. No debris, no wreckage, no survivors. It had simply ceased to exist. The Drawl were not an emotional species. They were warlords, conquerors, a civilization forged in battle. But now, they were afraid. The Vortian homeworld was next. The Vortian were among the oldest races in the galaxy. They had survived supernovas, galactic wars, extinction-level catastrophes. Their planet had stood for millions of years. It was considered untouchable, and yet within a single breath of time, it was erased. Not destroyed, not invaded, just gone. The Council fell into chaos. Entire fleets went dark. High-ranking officials disappeared. The galactic economy collapsed overnight. What was once a collection of proud, warring species had been reduced to terrified, scrambling survivors. And all the while, the messages continued. You have been seen. You have been measured. You have been found wanting. Then came the nightmares. At first, only a few reported them. Fleeting, eerie visions of something vast and endless lurking in the void. But soon, the reports flooded in from every corner of the galaxy. Creatures without form. Shadows that slithered through the edges of consciousness. A presence that could not be described, only felt. No one knew what it was, only that it was watching. And then Earth received a second message. This time it wasn't broadcast to the galaxy. It did not appear on every screen. It was sent directly to humanity. Only humans saw the words. Only humans heard the voice. You are different. It was the first and only time the message had changed. And that was what terrified humanity the most. The rest of the galaxy had been judged. And now, the question remained. Would humanity be spared? Or had they merely caught the interest of something far, far worse? The universe had gone silent. What was once a galaxy teeming with life, conflict, and politics had been reduced to whispers of terror. Entire civilizations were vanishing like footprints in a storm. Great fleets, planetary defense networks, ancient fortresses, all useless. And yet, Earth remained untouched. The Galactic Council no longer existed. What remained of its member species had fractured into desperate enclaves, hiding in deep space stations, in forgotten corners of the void. No longer rulers, no longer conquerors, only prey, waiting for their turn to disappear. But humanity had been given a message unlike the others. You are different. It was a statement, a declaration, a choice. And Earth had no idea what it meant. The Terran Defense Initiative's war room was buried deep beneath the surface of Mars, hidden behind layers of reinforced alloys, electromagnetic shielding, and quantum encryption barriers. It was the most secure location in the Sol system. Yet, despite all its technology, all its security, it could not stop the fear that hung over the room like a thick fog. High Marshal Jackson Reed sat at the head of the table, his face drawn with exhaustion. Across from him, leaders from every surviving human government, military branch, and scientific division waited for the one thing no one wanted to say aloud. "What do we do?" Admiral Vasquez, commander of Earth's orbital fleets, slammed her fist against the table. "We need to act first. Strike before it does." "Strike at what?" snapped Dr. Arthur Liang, lead researcher of TDI's Xenothreat Division. "Do you even understand what we're dealing with? This isn't an enemy we can fight. It doesn't use ships or soldiers or weapons. It just takes." "We don't know that," Vasquez growled. "We don't know anything." "And that's the problem," Reed interrupted. His voice was steady, but there was an edge of something else. Something dark. The rest of the galaxy was wiped away like dust, and yet we're still here. Not because we're stronger, not because we're smarter. He exhaled. Because it chose to leave us. A cold silence followed. President Darius Okoye of the Terran Union, one of the few civilian leaders still in power, steepled his fingers. "Then the question we must answer is simple," he said slowly. "Why?" Dr. Liang hesitated before speaking. "There is a theory." "Spit it out," Vasquez said. Liang licked his lips. "What if it doesn't see us the way it saw the others?" His voice lowered. "What if, to it, we're not like the rest of the galaxy? What if we're something new?" Reed frowned. "New how?" Liang hesitated again. "Humans have something no other species does. It's not intelligence, it's not technology." He met their eyes. "It's adaptation," Vasquez scoffed. "Every species adapts." "No, not like us." Liang leaned forward. "We don't just adapt to survive. We adapt to win. The Rulzarans invaded, and we didn't just fight back. We stole their technology, turned it against them, and wiped them out. Every time humanity has faced extinction, we evolved into something stronger, more dangerous. We refused to die." The room was silent. Liang continued, his voice shaking slightly. "Whatever this thing is, it erases entire species without a trace. But us?" He swallowed. "We see it. We feel it. Maybe we're the first ones who've ever noticed it watching. And maybe—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Maybe that means we have the ability to fight back." Reed leaned back in his chair. The thought was unsettling. If Liang was right, then humanity wasn't being ignored. They were being studied, tested. And the worst part? They had no idea what would happen if they failed. Then the lights flickered. The room went dark, and a new message appeared on every screen. "You were right." A chill ran through Reed's spine. Liang paled. "Oh no. We will see what you become." The message faded. The lights returned. The war room was silent, but the meaning was clear. Humanity had been given a choice: to evolve or to disappear like the rest. Reed's voice was grim. Prepare the fleet, because for the first time in history, Earth would not wait for the unknown to come to them. They were going to war. The preparations for war began immediately. Humanity had never faced an enemy like this. The Rule-Zaran War had been brutal, but at least there had been a fight. An enemy fleet, an empire to dismantle, a war to be won. This question mark. This was something else entirely. How do you fight something that doesn't exist in any conventional sense? The Terran Defense Initiative went into full mobilization. Every warship in the Sol system was refitted with the most advanced technology Earth had to offer. Every scientist, engineer, and strategist worked around the clock to decipher the impossible. No one slept, no one rested. And in the heart of it all, Jackson Reed watched the stars. It had been weeks since the last message. No new disappearances had been reported. No new worlds lost. No further signs that the unseen, as the Vortian had called them, had made their move. It was like the entire galaxy was holding its breath, and humanity was left standing at the edge of the abyss, waiting for something to push them in. Deep beneath the Martian surface, in the most secure research facility ever built, Dr. Arthur Liang and his team worked on what could only be described as madness. "We can't kill something we don't understand," Liang had said weeks ago, "but maybe we can change the rules of the game." The project, codenamed ECHO, was theoretical at best. It was based on the terrifying assumption that the unseen didn't just erase civilizations, it rewrote reality itself. The disappearances weren't simple destruction. They were a complete, fundamental undoing of existence, as if those planets, those species, had never been there to begin with. Which meant if humanity wanted to fight back, they needed to rewrite reality too. "Status?" Reed asked as he entered the lab, his presence demanding immediate attention. Liang turned, dark circles under his eyes, fingers twitching from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "We're close. Too close, honestly." Reed frowned. "Explain." Liang exhaled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "We built the device. It works, but—" He hesitated. "It's responding." The room went still. Reed's jaw tightened. "Responding," Liang swallowed. "Every time we activate a test pulse, we get a feedback signal from somewhere. It's like it knows what we're doing." Reed's heart pounded in his chest. "And," Liang's voice was barely above a whisper, "and it's watching us back." The decision was made. Protocol Black shifted into its final stage. The first fleet, Echo 1, was deployed toward the last known location of a vanished planet. The plan was simple: trigger the device, force a response, and see what happened. It was the most reckless, dangerous, and outright suicidal operation in human history. And yet, Echo 1 went willingly. Humanity had never been the strongest species in the galaxy. They had never been the most advanced. But they had something no other species had: the will to fight, even in the face of something beyond comprehension. Reed stood aboard the bridge of the UNSV Valiant, Earth's most powerful warship. The fleet was in position. The device was primed. Every screen, every sensor, every weapon system was locked onto the empty void where a planet should have been. And then Reed gave the order. "Activate ECHO." A pulse of energy rippled outward, warping the very fabric of space itself. For a moment, nothing happened. The stars remained, cold and distant. The silence of the void pressed down on them like an ocean of darkness. Then the screaming began. It didn't come from the comms. It didn't come from the speakers. It came from inside their heads, thousands of voices overlapping, a chorus of something ancient and hungry. The ship's lights flickered. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting and writhing like living things. The fabric of reality itself shuddered. And then they saw it. The void opened. It wasn't a portal. It wasn't a wormhole. It was something else. A tear in existence, a wound in the universe, and from within, something gazed back. Not a ship, not a fleet, not an army, just eyes. Too many to count, too large to comprehend. Reed felt his mind fracture under the weight of that gaze. His body locked in place, his thoughts unraveling. It was looking at him. It was looking at all of them. And then, for the first time in its unknowable existence, it spoke. "Show us." The void pulsed. The ship's systems went dead, and the fleet was gone. Earth waited. The last transmission from Echo 1 was received 6 hours ago. No response since, no signs of the fleet. They were alone, or so they thought. Then a single transmission came through. One word, a single whispered message. "Survive." The transmission was traced. It was coming from the Valiant, and the Valiant no longer existed in known space. Humanity had made first contact. Now, the real war would begin. The Valiant drifted in the void. Or at least it felt like drifting. There were no stars, no planets, no points of reference, just an endless, stretching darkness that swallowed all sense of direction. Reed had no idea how long they had been here. The ship's systems were unresponsive. The crew was silent, their minds still reeling from the sheer wrongness of whatever had just happened. And yet, he was still alive. That was the first sign that something had changed. Because if the unseen had erased entire civilizations without a trace, if it had swallowed entire species into nothingness, then why was he still breathing? Why was his ship still intact? "Show us." The words still echoed in his mind, whispered in a voice that wasn't sound, but something deeper, something imprinted into his very thoughts. They were being tested. That realization sent a shiver down Reed's spine. He had been prepared for destruction. He had been ready to fight and die. But this was something else. "Status report," he managed, his voice hoarse. For a long moment there was no response. Then, slowly, his officers snapped out of their daze, shaking off the weight of whatever had gripped them. "Systems are partially operational," said Santos, her voice trembling. "I don't know how, but we have power again." Reed frowned. "Weapons? Non-functional? Engines? Dead? Communications?" Santos hesitated. "That's the strange part, sir." She turned to face him, her expression grim. "We're receiving transmissions." Reed's pulse quickened. "From where?" Santos swallowed. "Everywhere." A cold dread settled in Reed's stomach. "Define everywhere." Santos's hands trembled as she brought up the data. "We're picking up distress signals, multiple frequencies, some in known languages, some in ones that don't exist anymore." Reed's breath caught in his throat. He moved to the main screen, watching as Santos displayed the transmissions. Some were recent, some were thousands of years old, some came from species that had been erased from history, and some were in human languages. "Impossible," whispered Vasquez. "That's impossible." Reed's hands clenched into fists. The unseen hadn't just watched civilizations vanish, it had kept them, or at least echoes of them, and now it had taken Echo 1 into the same place. Was this where the lost civilizations had gone? Were they still here, trapped in this place? Had humanity just crossed into something far beyond life and death? Then, the darkness shifted. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a movement. It was something more fundamental, like the fabric of space itself was bending. A shape emerged, a silhouette, vast and unknowable, shifting between dimensions. It had no form, yet it had every form. It was an absence, yet it was more present than anything Reed had ever encountered. And then, in the midst of the void, something changed. A shape took form. A figure, almost human. It was tall, impossible. It had no face, but Reed felt its gaze. And then it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but with understanding. "You are not like the others." Reed's mind burned. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand against the pressure, the weight of its presence. "We adapt," he forced out. "We survive." The being regarded him. Then it spoke again. "Show us." Reed exhaled. He understood now. This wasn't just survival. It was a challenge. The unseen had taken species before. It had consumed empires, erased histories. But humanity? Humanity had done something no one else had. They had looked back. And now, the test had begun. The Valiant was no longer alone in the void. And neither was humanity. Because whatever came next, the fate of the entire galaxy depended on what they did now. The void pulsed. It wasn't light. It wasn't sound. It was something deeper, something Reed's mind struggled to comprehend. The figure, if it even was a figure, remained motionless, but the space around it shifted. The very laws of reality bent and twisted like they were being rewritten in real time. And then, the pressure returned. Not an attack, not a threat, a demand. "Show us." Reed steadied himself. He had spent his life preparing for battles fought with weapons, tactics, and brute force. But this was something else entirely. He had no army, no fleet, no weapons. All he had was humanity itself. Reed took a slow breath and raised his chin. "You want to see what makes us different?" His voice was hoarse but steady. "Fine. Then watch." The Valiant was still adrift in the void, but its systems were slowly flickering back to life. Santos worked furiously at her console, her hands flying over controls as she attempted to make sense of the data pouring in. "We're reading gravitational distortions across multiple spectra," she said. "This place, it isn't space as we know it. It's like we're inside." "A construct," Liang finished. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Not a place, not a dimension, but something made." Reed frowned. "A prison," Liang shook his head. "Number an experiment." The thought made Reed's stomach turn. "Experimenting on what?" Liang hesitated, then pointed to the distress signals still flooding their sensors. "I think on us. On everything that's ever vanished." A cold realization settled over the crew. The unseen hadn't just erased civilizations. It had collected them, studied them. And now it was doing the same to humanity. "Enough," Reed muttered. "If they want to see what makes us different, we'll show them." He turned to Santos. "Reboot every system. Power up everything we have left. If this place is a construct, let's break it." Santos hesitated. "If we push too hard, sir, we could—" "That's the point," she nodded grimly. "Understood." The bridge hummed with renewed energy. Lights flickered, screens crackled, the engines sputtered, then roared to life, and the void reacted. The figure shifted, its edges unraveling and reforming in ways Reed's mind could barely process. It was watching, learning. Then the void itself rippled. The Valiant shuddered violently, as if the entire reality around it was reshaping itself. The distress signals blinked out, one by one, replaced by something new, something ancient, something angry. A deep, resonating pulse spread through the ship, not sound, but meaning, and Reed finally understood. They were not the first to fight back. They were just the first to still be standing. The first attack came without warning. Not weapons, not ships. A wave of pure force crashed against the Valiant, threatening to tear it apart at the molecular level. The ship groaned under the pressure. Metal screamed. The hull twisted like it was about to collapse in on itself. But it held. "Shields at maximum," Vasquez barked. "They're testing us." Reed's grip tightened. "Then let's pass the test." Santos's hands flew over her controls. "Sir, the ECHO device, it's resonating." Reed turned sharply. "Resonating with what?" Liang's face went pale. "With them." The Unseen weren't just watching anymore. They were responding. And then, for the first time since entering the void, something spoke back. Not the Unseen. Something else. A voice, ancient and fractured, filled the ship. "We remain." Reed's breath caught. He turned to Santos, who was staring wide-eyed at her console. "Sir," she whispered, "that came from inside the void." A cold realization settled over the crew. Not all of the vanished were gone. Some were still here. And now, with the ECHO device active, they had just woken them up. The test was no longer just for humanity. It was for everyone who had ever been taken. And the final battle had just begun. The void trembled. The Valiant stood at the center of something far greater than any war humanity had ever faced. The Unseen had pulled them into its experiment, tested them, observed them. But in doing so, it had made a mistake. It had assumed humanity would break like the others. It had assumed wrong. "We remain." The ancient voice echoed through the ship's systems, vibrating through the hull, through their bones. Reed didn't know who or what had spoken, but he knew what it meant. The civilizations that had been erased, the species that had vanished, some part of them had endured. And now, with humanity's defiance, with the activation of Echo, something deep within the void had woken up. "Sir," Santos said, voice shaking, "ECHO is syncing with the frequency of the void. It's aligning with whatever's trapped here." Liang's hands trembled over his console. "It's rewriting the parameters of this space. If we push it further—" "Do it," Reed ordered. Liang hesitated only for a second before slamming his hand down on the control panel. The Valiant shuddered as ECHO surged to full power. A pulse of energy rippled outward, not just across space, but across reality itself. For the first time, the void around them cracked. And then, the shadows screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence, a wave of sheer rage and confusion. The Unseen had never lost control before. It had never failed in its experimentations. Until now. Shapes twisted within the void, writhing in unnatural, shifting patterns. They weren't ships. They weren't beings. They were something else, something vast, something beyond matter. But they were not invincible, because humanity had just rewritten the rules. The moment Echo reached full synchronization, the void fractured. A blinding light split the darkness, searing through the Unseen like a wound across the fabric of existence. And from that light, the lost returned. Ships began to reappear, flickering into existence, some ancient, some new. Planets long thought erased flickered at the edge of reality, trying to return. The voices that had whispered in the void, trapped for eons, rose in unison. The test was over. Humanity had passed. And now the Unseen faced something it had never encountered before. Resistance. The void shook as something vast, something angry, surged back against its captor. The lost civilizations, the forgotten species, whatever traces of them remained, they fought back. Reed watched in awe as the darkness recoiled. The Unseen had devoured for so long, watching, measuring, consuming. It had been unstoppable. Until now. Humanity had done what no other species had. They had looked back into the abyss, and they had taught the abyss to fear. The Valiant re-emerged into real space with a violent jolt. One moment they were trapped in the void. The next they were home. Earth, the Sol system, the stars as they were meant to be. The crew sat in stunned silence, the hum of the ship's systems the only sound. "Are we?" Santos trailed off, eyes wide. "Are we back?" Liang stared at the readouts. "We are. But—" Reed turned. "But what?" Liang hesitated. Then, slowly, he turned his screen toward Reed. The galactic map was different. Planets that had been lost were back. Systems that had been erased from records had returned. And deep in the void, where the unseen had ruled for eons, there was nothing. Not silence, not darkness, just emptiness. Whatever had existed there before was gone. Reed exhaled slowly. "We changed something." Liang nodded. "We didn't just fight back. We rewrote the board." Santos's voice was barely a whisper. "So what happens now?" Reed looked out at the stars. The galaxy had been forever altered. Civilizations had returned. The unseen had been erased, or maybe it had retreated, licking its wounds, waiting for another moment to strike. Either way, humanity had proven itself. They were no longer just survivors. They were something new, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. Reed's lips curled into a grim smile. "Now," he said, "now, we see what we become." The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the quiet murmur of 1,000 alien voices, each representing one of the many species that formed the United Galactic Federation. Towering insectoids, gelatinous beings in containment suits, reptilian warlords, and countless others filled the grand hall. And standing before them, on a raised platform at the very center, was Ambassador Jason Reed, the last human voice in the council. He stood tall, though tension lined his face. The weight of his species' fate pressed heavily upon him. Across from him, Grand Arbiter Zelthoran, a being of the Ziffer Dominion with an elongated skull and shimmering emerald skin, raised a clawed hand. Silence fell upon the chamber. "Ambassador Reed," Zelthoran's voice echoed, laced with disdain. "The Council has deliberated. The vote is unanimous. Humanity is hereby expelled from the United Galactic Federation, effective immediately." A collective murmur swept through the chamber, some species showing satisfaction, others maintaining a neutral stance. Jason, however, remained unfazed. He had expected this. "This is a mistake," Jason said, his voice firm but measured. "You fear us because we refuse to kneel. You call us reckless because we fight for our own interests. But tell me, which one of you has never placed their own kind first?" Zelthoran's nostrils flared. "Your kind disrupts the balance. Humans refuse to adhere to our treaties, to our hierarchy. You lack the wisdom of older races and yet demand a seat at the table." Jason smirked. "Because we refuse to let stagnant, decaying civilizations dictate our future?" He scanned the room. "You preach peace, yet half the species here still wage wars in the dark. You say we're too young, yet we've done in 3 centuries what many of you haven't in millennia." A murmur of discontent rippled through the chamber. Some species nodded subtly, but none dared speak in defense of humanity. It was a lost cause. The decision had been made. Zelthoran struck the podium with his staff. "Enough. You may leave with what little dignity your kind still has." Jason inhaled sharply and nodded. "Fine. You don't want us? You won't have us. But you will regret this." He turned, his boots echoing against the pristine floor as he exited. The humans in attendance followed, silent but seething. Outside the chamber, General Amanda Vasquez, clad in her Earth Defense Fleet uniform, was already waiting with a knowing look. "They actually did it," she muttered. Jason sighed. Yeah, they did. She crossed her arms. So what now? Jason's smirk returned, but this time it held something different. Determination. Now? We rewrite the rules. Humanity wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The moment humanity was expelled from the Galactic Council, the wheels of change began turning. Back on Earth, the announcement was met with fury. News broadcasts ran footage of Jason Reed's final stand in the council chamber, replaying his words again and again. Protests erupted across human colonies, not against their leaders, but against the aliens who had cast them aside. The people didn't see this as a loss. They saw it as a declaration of war, one that had yet to be fought. At the Terran High Command on Luna, the most powerful leaders of humanity gathered. Generals, scientists, diplomats, and corporate heads filled the war room. A massive holographic display in the center showed the galactic map, marking every known trade route, resource hub, and strategic location. Jason Reed stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, his face set in stone. They think they've won by kicking us out, he said, voice calm but cutting. But we are no longer bound by their rules, their treaties, or their restrictions. They've just given us the one thing we've always thrived on. Admiral Vasquez smirked. Freedom. Exactly. Jason pointed at the map. For years, we've played by their laws, paid their taxes, traded under their tariffs, submitted to their ridiculous regulations. But now we set our own terms. Dr. Elias Carter, head of the Terran Research Division, leaned forward. Are you saying we should break their technology embargo? Jason met his gaze. Not just break it, shatter it. There was a heavy pause before Vasquez grinned. I like where this is going. For centuries, humanity had been artificially held back. The Council controlled what technology could be developed, what weapons could be built, what ships could be flown beyond designated territories. It was a system designed to keep them under control, to ensure no young race could rise too quickly. But now, with their expulsion, the floodgates had opened. We don't have their numbers, Vasquez admitted, but we don't need them. We have adaptability. We innovate faster than any species in the known galaxy. Jason nodded, and we're about to prove it. Within weeks, Earth's shipyards shifted into overdrive. The next-generation warships, previously held back by bureaucratic red tape, were greenlit for mass production. AI research, once tightly monitored by the Council, advanced at an exponential rate. Experimental weapons that had been locked away due to ethical concerns were finally being tested. Meanwhile, human corporations saw an opportunity of their own. With the Council's restrictions gone, Terran companies expanded aggressively into regions where alien businesses had once dominated. Human privateers, once labeled as mere traders, became something else entirely. Armed merchant fleets secured trade routes, offering protection for a price. It didn't take long for the rest of the galaxy to notice. The first real confrontation came when the Zephyr Dominion attempted to seize a former Terran colony, believing humanity to be too weak to defend it. They were wrong. The new Terran fleet arrived in force, equipped with weapons the Dominion had never seen before. Their ships were faster, their tactics unpredictable, their AI-driven targeting systems flawless. The battle lasted less than an hour. When the dust settled, the Dominion had lost an entire fleet. Humanity had lost a single ship. The message was clear. The Council had thrown humanity out. Now humanity would show them why that was their greatest mistake. The defeat of the Zephyr Dominion fleet sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For the first time in history, a younger species had not only defied an elder race, but utterly humiliated them in battle. The Council tried to downplay the loss, calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding, but behind closed doors, they were panicking. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was just getting started. Jason Reed stood on the observation deck of the Olympus shipyards, watching as the first of the new Dreadnought-class warships was completed. The HSS Vengeance floated in the void like a sleeping giant, its sleek black hull bristling with weaponry the Council had long deemed too dangerous for developing species. Admiral Vasquez joined him, a datapad in her hand. "We've just finished retrofitting the first batch of ships. AI-assisted targeting, electromagnetic shielding, next-gen railguns. We're years ahead of what the Council allows their own fleets to use." Jason smirked. "Good, because they're about to come knocking." The Council had underestimated humanity for too long. They had treated them as an upstart species, a minor inconvenience to be dismissed. But now they had no choice but to take Earth seriously. And just as Jason predicted, the Council's response came swiftly. A delegation arrived in Sol space, led by none other than Grand Arbiter Zelthoran himself. The massive Council flagship, Eminence, dwarfed the human escort ships as it took position in high orbit over Earth. Jason and Vasquez took a shuttle up to the Eminence, meeting the delegation in the Council's signature grand, opulent halls. Zelthoran stood at the head of the room, his emerald-green eyes filled with barely concealed contempt. "You have gone too far, Ambassador Reed." Jason chuckled, crossing his arms. "You threw us out, Arbiter. Did you think we'd just roll over and die?" the Zephyr leader hissed. "You have violated interstellar law. You have developed weapons forbidden to lesser species. You have conducted unauthorized military actions against a member race of the Council." Vasquez stepped forward, her voice cold. "We defended our people, something you failed to do when you let the Dominion attack us." The Council members murmured among themselves, clearly unprepared for this level of defiance. For centuries, younger species had always bowed to the Council's authority. But humanity? Humanity had evolved in war. They had survived through resilience. They didn't back down. Zelthoran's voice turned sharper. "You must cease your militarization immediately and submit to Council oversight, or face consequences." Jason's smirk widened. "Or what?" The Arbiter's expression darkened. "The Council will impose sanctions. We will cut your trade, isolate your species, and if necessary, we will enforce compliance." Vasquez scoffed. "You're threatening us with war?" "No," Zelthoran said coldly. "I am offering you a chance to avoid one." Jason exhaled slowly. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every alien present. They thought they still had power over humanity. They thought their threats carried weight. They were wrong. Jason took a step forward. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber. "We don't need your trade. We don't need your protection, and we sure as hell don't need your permission." Zelthoran's jaw clenched. "You are making a mistake." Jason shook his head. "Number, you made the mistake." His voice hardened. "You thought throwing us out would weaken us, that we would beg to be let back in, that we would fall in line like every species before us. But that's not how humanity works." He turned, starting for the exit. Before leaving, he glanced over his shoulder. "You wanted us out? Fine. But from now on, humanity answers to no one." With that, Jason and Vasquez left the Council chambers, leaving behind a room filled with stunned silence. Back on Earth, the declaration was made official. Humanity was no longer a part of the United Galactic Federation. They were something new, independent, unrestricted. And for the first time in history, an outsider species would no longer follow galactic law. They would write it. The Council's delegation returned to their homeworlds with grim expressions, their threats having fallen on deaf ears. Humanity had made its stance clear. They would not be governed, they would not be restrained, and they would certainly not bow. The response from the galactic community was immediate and divided. Some elder species, like the Zephyr Dominion, clamored for war, demanding swift and brutal retaliation to correct humanity's defiance. Others, however, saw something different. Opportunity. Within weeks of the Council's failed ultimatum, new communications flooded into Terran High Command. Species that had long suffered under the bureaucratic stranglehold of the United Galactic Federation reached out, offering to establish trade and military alliances with humanity. They had seen Earth's rapid technological advancements, their unpredictable and devastating military strategies, and, more importantly, their refusal to be controlled. To these species, humanity was no longer just a rebellious upstart. They were an inspiration. Jason Reed stood in the command center of the newly established Terran Sovereignty headquarters, scanning through the incoming messages. Vasquez stood beside him, reading over a report on recent fleet movements. "You're not gonna believe this," she muttered, handing him a datapad. Jason skimmed through the file, his brows raising slightly. The Zorvath clans, a nomadic warrior species that had fought the Council for centuries, had just declared their formal support for humanity. They weren't alone. Over a dozen smaller species, from independent merchant guilds to disenfranchised border worlds, had begun aligning themselves with Earth. Jason smirked. Well, looks like we're not the only ones tired of the Council's bullshit." Vasquez chuckled. "And the best part? The Council can't do a damn thing about it." Without the legal bindings of the Federation, humanity had become something dangerous, an unregulated, fast-moving powerhouse that no longer played by the rules. Meanwhile, deep in the Zephyr Dominion, Grand Arbiter Zelthorin stood before a gathering of warlords, his frustration boiling over. "Humanity has gone too far," he snarled, slamming his clawed hand against the table. "They have corrupted lesser species, expanded beyond their means, and now openly challenge our authority." One of the Dominion's admirals, a scarred reptilian brute, growled in response. "Then we do what should have been done long ago. We crush them." Zelthorin exhaled, composing himself. "Yes, but not yet." His emerald eyes gleamed with calculation. "Humanity fights like a cornered beast. We have seen what happens when they are underestimated." The warlords nodded grimly. The disastrous loss of an entire Dominion fleet had been a harsh lesson. "We will not make the same mistake." Zelthorin's voice was cold. "We will strike not with brute force, but with precision. We will divide them, break their alliances, bleed them slowly, and when the time is right—" His lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "We will erase them from history." Back on Earth, humanity was preparing for the inevitable. War was coming, and this time, they would not be caught unprepared. Jason stood in the war room, staring at the galactic map. His people had accomplished in months what others had failed to do in centuries. They had disrupted the balance of power, challenged the old empires, and shattered the illusion of Council supremacy. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy wasn't ready for what was coming next. Because now, humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The war didn't begin with a grand invasion. There was no declaration, no formal battle lines drawn. Instead, it started in the shadows. First, human trade convoys began vanishing without a trace. Merchant ships, once escorted by lightly armed patrol craft, were ambushed in deep space. Sensor records showed nothing, just ships disappearing mid-transit. Then came the sabotage. Supply depots on distant colonies erupted in flames. Data networks crashed, infrastructure failed, and entire communication grids went dark. Someone was testing them, probing their weaknesses. Jason Reed watched the reports pile up on his terminal. "They're trying to bleed us dry before the real war even starts." Admiral Vasquez nodded grimly. "Zelthorin isn't an idiot. He knows that if we fight head-on, we'll punch above our weight, so he's playing dirty." Jason exhaled, rubbing his temples. Good, Vasquez frowned. Good? Jason met her eyes, a cold smirk playing on his lips. It means they're scared. Across the stars, humanity's enemies lurked in the darkness, thinking they were clever. What they didn't understand was that humans thrived in the shadows. They had built entire industries around cyber warfare, black ops, and unconventional tactics. If the Dominion wanted to play that game, humanity would beat them at it. The first move came from the Ghost Division, an elite human intelligence network operating outside conventional military command. They tracked the missing convoys to a secret Dominion refueling station hidden in the nebula of Y-374. A squadron of human stealth ships, equipped with advanced cloaking technology, slipped into the nebula undetected. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. Human operatives hacked into the station's systems, triggering internal explosions before the enemy even knew they were under attack. Not a single Dominion ship escaped, but humanity didn't stop there. Sabotage teams infiltrated Dominion shipyards, planting viral AI codes that disrupted entire production lines. Advanced human AI, no longer restricted by council laws, launched relentless cyber attacks against Dominion war networks. Black Ops teams tracked down enemy spies, eliminating them with ruthless precision. For every human ship lost, 5 Dominion assets burned. Zelthorin's frustration grew. He had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt. The war of attrition was no longer in his favor. If he wanted to break humanity, he had only one choice: full-scale war. And that was exactly what Jason Reed had been waiting for. On Earth, the final piece of humanity's defense was completed: the Revenant Protocol, a fleet unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The moment the Dominion committed to open war, they would face not just humanity's military, but an unstoppable force of AI-driven warships, cybernetic-enhanced soldiers, and weapons so advanced that the Council had once forbidden them from even being researched. Humanity had been shackled for too long. Now they were unleashed, and for the first time in history, the galaxy would learn what it truly meant to fear humans. The Dominion struck with overwhelming force. Hundreds of warships emerged from hyperspace in a coordinated assault across human space. Zephyr dreadnoughts, massive city-sized vessels bristling with weapons, led the charge. Swarms of Dominion fighters filled the void, their sleek black hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. Plasma beams lanced through the darkness, cutting through human orbital defenses like paper. It was the largest military operation in the history of the Galactic Federation, and it was doomed from the start. Jason Reed stood in the war room of the Terran Sovereignty headquarters, watching as the enemy fleet advanced. Around him, high-ranking military officials and AI strategists analyzed incoming data in real time. Admiral Vasquez smirked. "Right on schedule." Jason nodded. "They think they're attacking us." He turned to the holographic display. "But we've been waiting for them." The moment the Dominion ships crossed into human territory, the Revenant Protocol was activated. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Dominion's admirals, watching their fleets carve a path through human colonies, believed victory was within reach. But then, reports started coming in. Ships lost navigation. Their targeting systems glitched. Entire battle groups went silent, their systems crashing without explanation. That's when the first human counterattack struck. In the shadow of a dying star, an unmanned Terran battleship, controlled entirely by AI, emerged from behind an asteroid belt and opened fire. Its railguns, powered by experimental magnetic acceleration, tore through Dominion hulls like they were made of paper. The enemy barely had time to react before another ship decloaked, then another, then hundreds. The humans had learned from their enemies. They had studied their tactics, their strategies. Now they were using them against them. Dominion admirals panicked as the tide turned. Human fleets, moving in unpredictable AI-coordinated patterns, outmaneuvered their forces at every turn. Dominion ships found themselves surrounded, their escape routes cut off. And then came the final blow. Cybernetic warfare. The AI viruses that humanity had developed, no longer restricted by council laws, unleashed themselves upon Dominion networks. The enemy's own ships turned against them, firing on their allies. Dreadnoughts powered down mid-battle, their crews locked out of control systems. The war had lasted only a day. By the time the Dominion fleet realized what had happened, it was already too late. Zelthorin, watching from the bridge of his flagship, felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Humanity had rewritten the rules of war, and now, for the first time in history, the galaxy would bow to them. Zelthorin gripped the edges of his command console, his emerald eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. The once proud Dominion fleet was in ruins. His dreadnought, the Veil of Conquest, stood as one of the last remaining warships still under his control. The rest had either been destroyed, disabled, or worse, turned against him. This is impossible," one of his bridge officers muttered, their scaled fingers shaking over the control panel. They were nothing, a lesser species. How? Zelthorin's jaw tightened. He had underestimated humanity. They all had. The Council had thought of them as reckless, as a species that needed to be guided. But the moment they had been freed from the Council's restrictions, they had evolved. Faster, deadlier, and more unpredictable than any elder species had ever anticipated. And now, the Dominion was paying the price. "Admiral!" another officer cried. "We're detecting multiple FTL signatures inbound. Human reinforcements!" Zelthorin turned sharply towards the holographic display. More Terran warships were emerging from hyperspace, larger, more advanced, each bristling with weaponry that shouldn't have been possible for a species this young. Humanity hadn't just been building a fleet. They had been building an empire, and now they were here to claim their victory. A transmission request came through. The comms officer hesitated before looking at Zelthorin. "It's them." Zelthorin exhaled, steeling himself before nodding. "Put them through." The hologram flickered to life, revealing Jason Reed standing tall, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Admiral Vasquez leaned against the command table, looking almost bored. "Zelthorin," Jason said, his voice calm, but edged with steel. "I'd ask if you're ready to surrender, but honestly, that ship has sailed." Zelthorin straightened, his pride warring with his survival instincts. "This war is not over," Jason smirked. "Oh, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet." He gestured to the battle behind him. "Your fleet is done. Your empire is next." Zelthorin's scales rippled in barely contained rage. "You think the Council will allow this?" Jason chuckled. "The Council? You mean the same Council that sat back and let you attack us? The same one that's terrified of what we've become?" He leaned forward. "We were the United Galactic Federation's greatest mistake. They kept us leashed, slowed us down, made sure we never got too powerful." His eyes darkened. "But then they threw us out. And now we're done playing by their rules." Zelthorin knew then. This wasn't just about the Dominion anymore. This was about humanity taking their place in the galaxy. No longer outcasts, no longer restricted. They were writing the new laws now, and the rest of the galaxy would have no choice but to follow. The war had ended. The Terran sovereignty had begun. The fall of the Zephyr Dominion was only the beginning. News of humanity's overwhelming victory spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Dominion, once an empire that had ruled through fear and brute force, was shattered. Their fleets lay in ruins, their warlords scrambling to secure what little power they had left. Some tried to flee, others attempted last-ditch resistance, but it didn't matter. Humanity had already won, and the galaxy was watching. Inside the United Galactic Federation's High Council chambers, panic gripped the elder races. The very species that had once voted to expel humanity now faced a terrifying reality. "They crushed the Dominion in a day," one counselor whispered, their many eyes wide with disbelief. "They are rewriting warfare itself," another hissed. "We have underestimated them for too long." At the head of the chamber, the Supreme Chancellor of the Council, a towering cephalopod-like being, raised a tendril. "Enough," it rumbled. "Humanity has overstepped. Their reckless expansion and disregard for order threaten us all." A silence fell. Everyone in the chamber understood what those words meant. They were preparing for war. But this time, the Council wouldn't just rely on one empire to fight their battle. They would unite all of them. Back on Earth, Jason Reed stood in the heart of the Terran Sovereignty headquarters, watching as holographic reports streamed in. Across former Dominion space, humanity wasn't just occupying planets. They were integrating them. Rebellious factions, long oppressed by the Dominion, welcomed human forces as liberators. Former Dominion warships, now under Terran control, were being repurposed into the growing Sovereignty fleet. Humanity wasn't just expanding. They were building something new. Admiral Vasquez walked up beside him, arms crossed. "Council's pissed," she said, tossing a datapad onto the table. "They just declared us an unlawful rogue state." Jason smirked. "Let me guess. They're calling for collective action against the human threat?" Vasquez nodded. "They're gathering a coalition. The Council is scared, Jason. They know they can't control us anymore, so they're about to throw everything they have at us." Jason exhaled, glancing at the map of the galaxy. The Council had every advantage: numbers, resources, alliances forged over millennia. On paper, humanity was still outmatched, but they weren't fighting on paper. He turned to the gathered military leaders. "They think we're reckless, unstable, that we're going to lash out first." General Carter scoffed. "They clearly don't know us." Jason nodded. "Exactly. We're not going to start this war. They are, and when they do..." He leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "We finish it." As the Galactic Federation mobilized its Grand Alliance, they didn't realize the truth. They weren't fighting an upstart species anymore. They were fighting the architects of a new galactic order. And humanity? Humanity had been waiting for this moment all along. The war began not with a declaration, but with an execution. A human diplomat, sent to negotiate a peaceful resolution with the Galactic Council, was arrested upon arrival. Within hours, a public broadcast aired across the galaxy, an image of the diplomat kneeling before the Council's high tribunal, their hands bound, their face bloodied. Then, the sentence was carried out. A plasma blade swung down, and humanity had its answer. The response was immediate. On Luna, inside the war room of Terran Sovereignty headquarters, Jason Reed watched the execution replay in silence. Around him, the highest-ranking officials of humanity stood, their expressions grim. Admiral Vasquez exhaled slowly. "Well, I guess we're past negotiations." Jason's jaw tightened. He had expected war. He had even welcomed the challenge. But this wasn't just a strategic move. This was a message. The Council hadn't simply declared war. They had made it personal. He turned to General Carter. "How long until the fleet is ready?" Carter didn't hesitate. "We can deploy within 48 hours. Jason nodded. "Then let's make something clear." His voice was cold, final. The Council wanted to show the galaxy what happens to those who defy them. He gestured to the holographic display, where the execution still played on loop. Now we show them what happens when you provoke humanity. The first strike came at the edges of Council space. Terran warships, sleek and bristling with weapons the Council had deemed too dangerous centuries ago, emerged from slip space without warning. The enemy's fleets, built for control, not survival, were caught unprepared. Their defensive lines collapsed in minutes. Their colonies, used to Federation peacekeeping, surrendered before the first shots were even fired. But humanity wasn't here to occupy. They were here to burn the old order to the ground. Council shipyards were reduced to floating wreckage. Military outposts were turned into lifeless husks. Every strategic stronghold, every carefully placed defensive barrier, shattered. And the most terrifying part? The Council had no idea where humanity would strike next, because humanity wasn't following any pattern the elder species understood. They weren't following rules. On the Council's homeworld, panic reigned. The Supreme Chancellor stood in the Grand War Chamber, surrounded by trembling advisors. "They are unpredictable," one of the generals admitted. "They do not fight like the Dominion. They do not fight like anyone we have faced before." The Chancellor's tendrils coiled in frustration. Then what do they want? Silence. No one had an answer. Because for the first time in history, the Council was fighting an enemy that wasn't seeking land, resources, or status. Humanity didn't want concessions. They wanted justice, and they wouldn't stop until the Council was nothing but dust. Back on Earth, Jason Reed watched as the first phase of the war unfolded exactly as planned. His fleet commanders sent in their latest reports. One by one, the Council's defenses were collapsing. But Jason knew this was just the beginning. He turned to Vasquez. "Tell me when we have a clear path." Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "A clear path to where?" Jason's expression was ice. To their homeworld. Because this wasn't just war. This was retribution. The war reached its final stage faster than anyone had predicted. The Council, once the unshakable authority of the galaxy, was now a fractured remnant of its former self. Entire fleets had been annihilated, their supply lines cut, their worlds abandoned. The carefully constructed illusion of their invincibility had been shattered by a species they had once dismissed as reckless and insignificant. And now, humanity stood at their doorstep. The skies above the Council homeworld burned. Terran warships descended like falling gods, their weapons raining destruction upon the last of the Council's defenses. Plasma turrets fired desperately from planetary fortresses, but they were no match for the AI-assisted precision of human war machines. Elite Council strike teams attempted one final stand at the capital's gates, only to be met by cybernetically enhanced human soldiers, faster and deadlier than anything they had faced before. Inside the grand chambers of the Council, Supreme Chancellor Valzorith watched as the doors to the war room were blasted open. Jason Reed stepped inside, his uniform battle-worn, his eyes cold and unyielding. Behind him, Admiral Vasquez and a team of Terran operatives spread through the chamber, weapons ready. The Chancellor, battered and desperate, raised a trembling tendril. "Please," he rasped, "there must be another way." Jason didn't blink. There was. He stepped forward. "You killed it." The execution of humanity's diplomat had sealed their fate. The war could have been avoided, a balance could have been struck, but the Council had made a choice, and now humanity was making theirs. Jason's voice was like a final verdict. "The United Galactic Federation is over." Vasquez lifted her rifle. "So is your rule." A single shot echoed through the chamber, and with that, the old order fell. The aftermath reshaped the galaxy. With the Council dismantled, humanity didn't take its place. They erased it. No more centralized power, no more bureaucratic oppression disguised as diplomacy. The old empires that had once relied on the council's authority now had two choices: adapt to the new system of independence or fade into irrelevance. Former Dominion colonies, long subjugated, were finally free. Merchant guilds and smaller factions, once at the mercy of council regulations, now thrived under a new, unrestricted economy.